But other than that, I think that we are ready to get started.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Fay. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Executive Director of Voices for Vermont's Children. And I'm joined here today by my colleagues, Sarah Teal, and I think Amy Brady is here listening. She's juggling a lot of policy issues right now, but she's in the room. And I thought it might be great. I certainly recognize some of your names and faces, but there's a few I don't know. If you wouldn't mind in the chat, maybe introducing yourself with your name, if you have an organization, anything else you think we should know about you, it'd be great to know who's in the room. I would have us go around, but this is not a very long time slot. And we have a fair amount of information to share and we want to get talking. So with that, I will share my screen and start our presentation. Voices for Vermont's Children is one of the organizations that has been working to improve the benefits in the Reach Up program formally and informally for many, many years. And I think when the Poverty Council wasn't continued by Governor Scott, we found ourselves looking for needing some sort of a construct to continue coordinating our efforts around Reach Up. So we have a coalition, and these are the current members of the coalition. Always happy to include more folks. And then I think the next step I'm going to turn it over to our research director, Sarah Teal, to go over some data just to provide context. I'm assuming, and this may be an incorrect assumption, but for the sake of the time, I'm assuming that folks in this space have a general understanding of what Reach Up is, who it serves. But we're going to talk about some of the trends. And I also just want to note that we're in kind of an exciting time right now in terms of energy and willingness, both at the federal and the state level, to be talking about serious anti-poverty measures and investments in kids and families. And so this feels like one of the more exciting Reach Up presentations that we've gotten to do in recent years because we're actually seeing some action. We've had 3 one-time emergency grants distributed to Reach Up participant families using COVID monies. So we've kind of lit a fire and we're interested in keeping that going. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Sarah, and I can advance the slides. You can just tell me when.
Okay, hi. Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. Michelle, you can just, I think I'll start with sharing my screen.
Okay. Okay.
Is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah, no.
Actually, can you go back to what you were?
Yeah, sure.
That was really good. Sorry.
Is that right?
Yeah, that graphic is showing, as it says, the 2020 month by month. This is kids under 18 benefiting from Reach Up. That top line is Vermont. The lines below are our counties. Obviously, it's a little crowded down there, so it's not all labeled, but there's this general, we just wanted to highlight this general sort of bump, right? Like April, so the pandemic, there was a little uptick, and then things like unemployment and stimulus checks started to come out. And so actually where we've landed at the end of calendar year 2020 is lower, and here's where I'll show my screen, as part of a historical trend. Let me show you. I can find. This is perpetually exasperating. Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay, so in terms of a longer term trend, this is the years 2007 to 2019. So you can see, like, these are all the counties in Vermont, and Vermont is this line that's labeled down here, 6.1%. That's the percentage of kids in Vermont in 2019 that were benefiting from Reach Up. And as you can see, this trend line across all counties is exactly the same. And it just really emphasizes that this is something that changes with the state of the overall economy. This bump was our last recession. And so in terms of it just, as a grant program, the need for it changes based on the overall economy. However, as Michelle will probably get into a little bit later, it's not necessarily as responsive as it could be to really actually meeting this need that changes depending on circumstances. Okay, I'll stop sharing now and go back to Michelle's little show.
My little, oops, I just clicked.
Your fabulous show.
Yeah, so fabulous. Okay, we've already done this one, yeah?
Yeah. So here we've just pulled together based on, many of you have probably seen the Legislative Joint Fiscal Office's basic needs budget that they pull together, which is a calculated amount of, monthly income needed and annual income needed for various family configurations. And here I've pulled 3 of those family configurations, which include children, because Reach Up is a program for children. And we're trying to compare Reach Up, both the way the basic needs calculation for Reach Up is done and the actual grant, which you see the actual grant amounts for these family sizes in yellow, versus some other measures of economic security. One is the full basic needs amount at the top in purple, the JFO's full basic needs, which is basically what a family will spend every month absent supports. So absent other, this is what it really costs if you're going to pay for everything. And the green line shows that same budget, but we've subtracted expenses of healthcare, assuming Medicaid, food, assuming 3 Squares Vermont, childcare, assuming the Reach Up, child and childcare subsidies, and things like savings, which are included in the budget. Obviously, we want people to have savings, but we've taken out, everything that could be covered by any other programs. And what we're left with is this green bar showing sort of what people are still going to have to pay, even taking advantage of other programs. The blue bar below that is what the DCF basic needs calculation that Reach Up is sort of referencing, how much they say, that those basic needs will cost. And then below that, the grant amounts, which you can see is about half of that, right? And then below that, this is the official poverty threshold. So if you were to break it down, like average it per month. So yeah, it's just very clear that Reach Up grants and even adding in other safety net programs is still going to leave people in poverty.
This we've already done.
Oh, okay. So we went over the slide, so you can. That was the counties.
I had that one in my master. Yeah. Anyway, it's great.
Well, Michelle, if you want to, let's go back to Michelle. If you want to pick up, is it your turn?
Yeah, I think it's my turn. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just wanted to run through kind of where we're at, because when we submitted our proposal to the Alliance for their for the legislative agenda, things have just been changing very quickly with COVID money coming into the state. And so our original ask had been to work to get a Vermont rental subsidy to every Reach Up household in need of one. So, basically, most Reach Up households do not have access to subsidized housing or live in public housing. Only about a quarter do. So, but with the $200 million that is flowing into the state for COVID emergency rental assistance, Reach Up families will basically automatically qualify for that benefit. And so our ask is that the DCF work directly with Vermont State Housing Authority to certify their eligibility to reduce as many barriers as possible to Reach Up households accessing those funds. And so what I've done with the proposals is the format here is kind of listed the opportunity that we have given the COVID money. And also just recognizing kind of embedded in there is the challenge of reach up, which when we looked, the reason we chose housing to focus on before this new money came in was that it's the greatest unmet need. And Sarah has some amazing interactive visuals that you can see kind of how much of the budget is taken up by housing. And even with the full housing allotment and the full basic needs allotment, a reach out grant doesn't meet the fair market value rent in any town in the state. And so so really focusing on housing is where we landed. So we had this opportunity, and then we just want to point out that the impact of responding to this request would be we'd be reducing the barriers to securing or retaining housing for the most economically disadvantaged families. And the more that we can reduce transitions and periods of homelessness in childhood, that has tremendous returns in terms of mental and physical health, earnings, and other outcomes for those children into their adulthood. So what we've done is just kind of bury some of the messaging that we are hoping people can use into the proposals here. So as you're talking to legislators, you can refer back to this. And I should note that both the slides, formatted as slides, and then a document that's more just like a little cheat sheet are available in the materials that were uploaded for the session. So the second proposal is using the current cost of living figures to determine the standard of need for reach up grants. In one of the previous slides, Sarah's images really showed how far below the current standard of need the grants are. And we've only had one cost of living increase for the program in 20 years, and that was in 2019, so fairly recently. That brought the standard of living up to 2008 levels. They had been at 2004 until then. But it's important to note that they're still subject to this thing called the rateable reduction, which is basically reconciling how much money's been appropriated by the legislature with the need. So if you only appropriate half as much money as the need, then the grants are reduced by that much. And so basically right now the grants are half of what a family would need to meet their basic needs in the year 2008. And as a result, the diminishing investment in the program means that as a share of people in poverty, the program is serving fewer and fewer people and families in poverty. It used to serve the majority of folks who were below the poverty line. And because of the decreased investment, fewer than half of folks in Reach Up currently are served by Reach Up. I mean, folks in poverty are served by Reach Up. There's a couple charts here that I'm not going to click on just for the sake of time, but the Center on Budget and Public Policy has some just tremendous amount of resources around what this looks like on a state-by-state level. So you can see how Vermont compares to other states. This first one, I just will highlight one of the points from it that really struck out for me. It's this, actually, okay, I don't know, actually, I'm afraid if I click on it, it won't still share, so I'm not going to. But basically, it shows how over time, the benefit as a share of poverty level has reduced. And so, and what was remarkable to me is back in 1970, the grants that Vermont was providing to low-income families brought them above the poverty level. It was 107% of the poverty level. So now we're well below, we're about 40% of the poverty level. So we have fallen a long way, and how that the program doesn't meet its stated purpose. So then there's an impact statement. These are all things that people who work with low-income families and kids know, that, and it's framed in a positive way. When we improve family economic stability, the effects are wide-ranging. Children do better in school, they have better physical and mental health, and they see higher earnings as adults. All right, so that's the second ask. The third ask is just sort of a blanket, like, hey, there's just so many moving parts around what's going on with COVID money, what's going on with revenue projections. So as the budget process continues, I just want people to remain open to the possibility of dumping more money into this program because it so desperately needs it. So one of the arguments that that's being made about this kind of influx of federal money and then the state revenues that have been kind of bolstered by that is that it's one-time money, so we can't use it to do anything that would have ongoing program expenses. And I'm actually going to move on to the next slide because it's getting into what do we do? How do we push back against that message when effectively every year's revenue picture is one time, right? I mean, we have projections and stuff, but we really want legislators to be thinking about what's the current need for kids and families and what are our current resources, and then do what you can to address the current need with your current resources. It's fairly straightforward. And because Reach Up is a program for children, more than 70% of the participants on Reach Up are children. And something like 42% of those are under 6. We like to stress that, you know, childhood is a one-time experience. And so kids don't have a chance to get back those missing years, and the years that they spend in a state of deprivation can have lifelong impact on their security, their health, and their economic mobility. So the key here is to try to trigger people's values. And so the values that are behind a lot of these messages are prevention, child well-being, security, mobility, opportunity, and potential. So then another thing you will sometimes hear is that increasing benefits reduces people's incentive to work. And we just know this to be false. There's study after study has found that when you meet basic needs, that is the foundation of future economic security and mobility. So there's a lot of research around what scarcity does. And I like to say, like, if anyone's ever been on a diet, you know how the concept of scarcity, like, makes you focus on what's right in front of you, as opposed to being able to think about long-term outcomes and long-term plans. So this is not a unique experience for people with low incomes. This is a human experience about scarcity. And then another frequent pushback that you will hear is that, well, but people on Reach Up are also getting 3 squares, and they're getting fuel assistance, and there's all these other ways that they're being bolstered, and so they're actually, you know, making more than a person making minimum wage or whatever. So even I think it's just important to point out, we're going to move into an exercise that really shows it in real world terms, that even with all of these benefits, families who are eligible for Reach Up are still living well below the federal poverty level. And the kind of positive frame there again is that a boost in direct financial assistance gives families the flexibility they need to use income in ways that help that meet their household needs. So, you know, food benefits can be only used on food. So what if you have a garden and what you actually need is more money for diapers because they're incredibly expensive, or it lets families actually direct resources to meet their specific needs and lets them be flexible and kind of make use of the resources that are available through their social networks and other things. So with that, I am going to stop sharing so that I can then share this video, which Jessica and Sandra, who are with us today, put together, and then we're going to just use it as a discussion jumping off point. Yep, share screen. Okay, and Chrome. Oh, I think I maybe needed to maximize. Hold on, I think I need to maximize for video or something. Yep, share sound, optimize for video clip. Okay, let's try this again. Oh, please install. This might not work. Sorry, y'all. All right, let me know if you can hear this or not.
Not legal aid. My name is Sandra Cross, and I'm a mom of 3 boys and a professional personal care attendant for children with disabilities.
We're here today to do a Reach Up budget exercise together. Reach Up is Vermont's cash assistance program for low-income families with children. It's funded by the Federal Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Block Grant. Reach Up's purpose, as defined by statute, is to improve the well-being of children by providing for their immediate basic needs. But our budget exercise shows that the program fails to achieve its purpose.
A couple years ago, I got a traumatic brain injury. Personal care attendants make less than $15 an hour, so there's no saving money for emergencies. My brain injury caused such intense headaches and comprehension problems that my doctor said I couldn't work. I had to do years of physical therapy to recover. With no income and savings, I had to go on Reach Up.
So let's take a look at your budget while you were on Reach Up. Who were you living with at the time?
My oldest son was out of the house. My second son, who was autistic, was in college and lived with me. And so did my youngest son. He was in middle school.
Okay, so that puts you at a household size of 2, since the program only covers kids until they're 18. The maximum monthly grant for a family of 2 is $625. Is that what you got?
Yes, I got 3 squares, Medicaid, and fuel assistance.
Okay, so you did get some other benefits on top of your Reach Up, and we'll build those into your budget. So with Medicaid, you'd have almost no healthcare costs, but what about food?
We got $355 per month in 3 squares Vermont, and I probably spent another $25 a week on top of that. That's not a lot, so I'd skip meals sometimes to make sure the boys had enough to eat.
Okay, so around $100 a month for food. What about cleaning supplies and laundry?
$75.
Okay. Transportation?
My car loan was $188, and I didn't want to let my car get repossessed because I really needed it to get to physical therapy, and I knew I'd need it when I was ready to go back to work. Gas was around $80 per month.
Okay, so that comes to $268, and we will just forget about car insurance. What about phones and internet? They're a must with kids in school and all your medical issues. How much was that?
$135.
How about electricity?
$88.
Okay. Oh boy. So we haven't gotten to rent yet, and there's no money left. We're actually at minus $41. So now things are going to get awfully hard. How did you pay for heat?
Between fuel assistance and getting emergency help at Community Action and setting the temperature at 58, I made it work. It was cold, but we survived.
Okay, so I know that your rent was below what we call fair market rates and is considered affordable, but you didn't have any money left in your budget, right?
Yes, I don't have a housing subsidy like Section 8 voucher. So when I was on Reach Up, I just couldn't pay. My landlord filed for eviction twice. You got the first case dismissed on a technicality.
That's right. And then the second time, because of coronavirus, we had an eviction moratorium that stayed the case. And then, thank goodness, the Coronavirus Relief Fund Rental Housing Stabilization Program came along and paid everything that you owed.
And without that, we would have been homeless.
Yeah. The reality is that less than 30% of Reach Up families have housing subsidies. So with the cash grants being so low, $625 for a family of 2, $744 for a family of 3, it's really no surprise that so many Reach Up families experience eviction and homelessness. But back to your case, let's look at your other expenses, school supplies, clothing.
I did the best I could with an impossible situation.
You sure did. You know, no one could make this math work.
Yes, my Reach Up case manager was very kind and helpful, but I couldn't provide for my kids with so little financial assistance. It's just lucky that we didn't end up homeless or losing my car. I would have never been able to get the job I have now if I didn't have shelter and transportation.
And I'm really hoping that your story is going to help our viewers understand that families eligible for Reach Up are entitled to something better, for the program to fulfill its purpose, making sure Vermont kids have food and shelter and clothing. We need to increase the monthly Reach Up grant.
Investing in Reach Up is investing in the future of Vermont's kids and giving parents a pathway out of poverty.
Thank you so much for doing this with me today, Sandra, and thank you, everybody.
Oops. So let me stop sharing there. So I feel we're just very lucky to have Sandra and Jessica with us. I invite either of you to participate as sort of co-panelists in our discussion. But we'd just love to open it up for questions, reflections. I know that there's folks on this call who are have direct personal experience or work with families who have experience with Reach Up. What are you hearing in your communities? How can we help you prepare to be strong advocates?
I'm just going to jump in there, right, and say I'm about to cry because I have a hard time watching myself on video, so I haven't really watched it. But I am so grateful to Sandra for telling her story and for being so brave and for being here today. And I think you're amazing.
Thank you.
Very much.
And feel free to ask me questions, everybody, because, you know, I was down in the trenches and there's so many misconceptions. And, you know, the more we talk about it in conversations and people ask the hard questions, the more we're going to change things. So feel free to ask questions because I'm brutally honest and I want people to understand. And, you know, things got to change.
I really appreciate, Sandra, your comment about just like sort of breaking down these conversation barriers, right?
Yeah.
I've been working on some projects at Let's Grow Kids where we're thinking about food insecurity and how we can support like early childhood programs to do food insecurity screening and get more families, you know, access to nutrition. And that's a big part of what we're talking about with folks, right? Like, we are not in a society where asking about food security is a norm. It's typically more a shaming type question, right? Where you're going to feel shame, you're going to feel embarrassment, right? But I think that one interesting thing about that was that, like, because of COVID, first people's needs, right, were so heightened, right? But also just like providers, like knowing how needy their families are, right? So just pushing themselves into those conversations. Because it should be normal to say, I don't have food right now for my family and I need help. The other thing I'd like to say too, because I'm a big proponent of the Help Me Grow Resource Center in Vermont, so 211, because I think that's another thing I hear from both families and early childhood providers that I work with, that like this system is hard to navigate.
Yeah.
And not only do you still do not get enough money, food, or anything to care for your family. But at the same time, when you don't know who to call. So I've been sort of on a personal mission to sort of promote like the Help Me Grow Resource Center, you know, extension to phone number 211, because it's a central access point. So I'm just putting that out there. But I really appreciate it, Sandra, because your story, unfortunately, is not uncommon. And you know, when you work with families and children in the state, you hear it all the time. So I just really appreciate you bringing it up and allowing us to live in it with you.
There's so many misconceptions about people on Reach Up, and you know, I didn't have a choice. And I'm hoping by sharing my story that people do start those conversations and they remove some of that stigmatism that's attached to when people ask for help. You know, like you know, we're part of the community, and if I'm struggling, kind of like the leg of the stool is struggling, because I help children with disabilities. Like I take the really hard kids and invest in them. But if I am not well because I'm worried about home, you know, my home, and not eating because I want to make sure the boys have food, then it really causes an imbalance.
I think a lot of people also don't realize how expensive it is to be broke. Like how everything gets more expensive, how having bad credit, having your credit ruined makes it nearly impossible to get the things that a lot of people take for granted, and how it's just like a snowball effect.
And it's almost impossible to, I felt like it was almost impossible to reverse that snowball, but Jessica was huge, and I literally just put out as many feelers as I could, because I wasn't gonna let that define me. I wasn't going to you know, I want my experience to help others. And I didn't want the stigmatism to define me or others. I want people to ask for help. Because like Jessica says, we all need it at one time or another.
Were you going to say something, Jessica?
Yeah, I think one thing that's also really compelling about Sandra's story, right, is here's someone who's
you very well.
attendant. What?
Can't hear you very well.
Oh, sorry. Sandra knows how bad my computer is as we were recording that video. So one of the things that I think is particularly compelling about Sandra's story too is here's someone who is working as a personal care attendant, making so little money, doing such important work that when she hit this moment where she wasn't able to work there, of course she couldn't save money. And it's not, so beyond even just the reach up, the fact that we pay people who work in childcare and so little that they're constantly at risk, if one thing goes wrong, of ending up on these programs.
Yeah, and we didn't really talk about the racial equity component of these programs, but it's huge. And there's been a lot of analysis done around how programs that are kind of the bottom rung of the economic mobility ladder are the ones that are the least supported, the most underfunded, et cetera, and the ones that are actually serving a disproportionate number of people of color because of systemic racism and historical policy decisions that have been made that have reduced people of color's access to economic justice. And so, yeah, it's, I will just maybe editorialize for a bit while I wait for people to ask questions around, you know, some of the frustration early on in the pandemic was that there was this almost an exacerbation of the kind of deserving versus undeserving poor dynamic. Like if you had been connected to the workforce in some way, then getting your basic needs met was prioritized, whereas if you had been excluded from the economy for any number of reasons, it was a little bit like, well, you already had it bad. so you know, like there was a little bit of pushback around trying to direct some of the resources that were coming into the state to folks who were enrolled in Reach Up. And I'm really glad that that seemed to shift the further we got into the pandemic, and that legislators, we have legitimate champions now, which is a really refreshing change, where we have, you know, I should say there's always been champions, but there've been sort of lone voices, and that there is now really a growing group of legislators who are sticking their necks out and taking a stand for Reach Up and educating themselves about it. So they're really strong advocates. So really most of the House Human Services Committee is on board. Representative Taylor Small has been just a tremendous advocate. We are working with some national partners to put on a briefing that'll be presented to House Human Services and then Senate Health and Welfare later this month or early in April, to just provide some federal landscape, like what are other states doing? What are the possibilities and opportunities that are going to be presented as a result of the, I keep forgetting the name of the new Biden bill, but the American Recovery something.
American Rescue Plan.
Rescue Plan. Okay, yeah. Yep, right. The heroic. And then whatever comes next. And so there is some money flow, will be more money flowing. So how do we make sure that we can use that to make kind of permanent change in how we address poverty? Yes, we have some hands up. The diaper bank people. Where
Hi, Michelle.
Oh, hi, sorry, I couldn't. Hi.
I'm just curious to understand a little bit more about how Vermont compares to the national landscape, and whether, I just don't personally know, is Reach Up a nationwide program, or is it just a Vermont? I mean, obviously there's probably comparison programs, but I'm just curious, like, as a comparison nationwide, how Vermont is doing, because certainly the numbers that you shared earlier didn't seem like, you know, as how we should be doing, we weren't doing very well. So I'm just curious how that compares on a national scale.
Maybe I will share one of those charts that we are in the top half, probably the top quarter of states in terms of our benefit level. What's happened over time is that historically southern states were terrible and now the North is caught up basically. So, but what's really fascinating is New Hampshire, which, you know, Vermonters like to think we're better than New Hampshire, right? I mean, in so many ways we are. But so to answer your bigger question, TANF, temporary aid to needy families, or temporary assistance to needy families, is a national program. It's a block grant program as of, you know, when President Clinton ended welfare as we know it in 1996. Yeah, boo. It became a block grant. And so every state has it, and states, and other people can jump in here too, but states, there are a bunch of rules around how you can use it. There is a state maintenance of effort, so kind of a state match that's required. And what Vermont does, Vermont actually does an admirable job with the resources that are made available federally, where basically we apply our TANF grant to parts of the budget that are an easier match with the restrictions of the funding, and then kind of pass that money through. I call it like legal money laundering, pass that money through to Department for Children and Families to do reach up. And so a lot of reach up is actually state money, even though it's our TANF program, our federal TANF program. So Jessica, do you want to add anything to that? Well, I think I will share this chart because it's really interesting.
So here's the thing for me, right? I kind of don't care what other states are doing because other states are doing so terribly. Vermont isn't that poor, right? The things that we're talking about in the legislature right now, they're all rubbing their hands like, oh, we're getting all this federal money. We're going to have a bunch of money. People are excited. We're in good financial shape. So how about we look out for the people who are like, have been long forgotten? The federal switch from aid to families with dependent children, which was an entitlement program, right? There was more consistency across the country, was destroyed thanks largely to demonization of people in poverty and some really racist rhetoric, and switched to TANF. Block grants tend to be disasters for people in poverty, right? And so until TANF gets repealed, and we end that welfare as we know it and go back to a real entitlement program based on guaranteed basic income, because no kid should have to live in poverty like this in a country as rich as the United States. At least here in Vermont, right, where I've got a little bit more control, I'm going to be fighting like hell for us to actually invest in Vermont kids, invest in these families, because they are not undeserving. They are not to be for. It's not as simple as just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and go get some job, right? So we have more resources than we think. It's how do we choose to spend it, right? And I am not content to just forget about the forgotten.
Yeah.
And we pay for it downstream, right? Like if Sandra had ended up losing her housing, and again, the only reason why we were able to pull that off is because of COVID and all this money coming in. That wouldn't have normally been there. If a family becomes homeless and they end up in, you know, potentially emergency shelter or in a motel at extreme cost to the state, plus there's all the educational harm to the kids, the mental health and health, you know, so many things that are really hard to measure. So to me, it's just setting up families for generational poverty and a bunch of, you know, downstream disasters. So let's do the right thing. Let's do the right thing.
Let's do the right thing. Yeah. So this is this amazing, like, interactive thing where you slide. So you start over here and you see, you know, kind of the familiar map where the Southeast is terrible in everything and doesn't invest. And then you kind of move it along and you see everybody getting terrible. And so we go from Vermont doing 107, having the benefit in Vermont being equivalent to 107% of the federal poverty line to the current, which is less than 40% of the federal poverty line. And then this one's a little bit harder to share because it's a huge graph, but basically it's showing, it's the thing I was talking about around TANF, what percentage of people in poverty is TANF serving over time. And so the first column is back on welfare, ended as we know it. And then the change over time. And Vermont, you can see it used to be 80% of people in poverty were served by our safety net program, by our ADFC or ANFC, AFDC, whatever, the precursor to TANF. And then you can just see it sort of creeping down and down and down. So now it's 49%. So 30% fewer of people in poverty are eligible and able to get on the program.
And Michelle, sorry, can I ask a follow-up question, and forgive my ignorance just because I'm not as familiar with this, but has that number gone down from 80 to 50 both because of requirements that are burdensome, or is it just there's not enough money? I mean, obviously the actual benefit is not high enough, but there's also just not enough money overall in the program to accept the number of people that would bring us back closer to that 80%. What's the main driver of that lowering over time?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know that we know the exact, oh, Sarah has an answer.
Can I just jump in? This might partially answer that question. As Michelle said, when this program turned into a block grant program, it came with a lot of rules, but it also came with much more flexibility than it had previously had for how states spent that whole block. So that huge chunk of money that comes in, states can spend in a wide variety of ways. And so right now, Vermont is spending about 14.3% of that total amount of money on basic assistance, which is what we're talking about, like the grants. The United States, on average, as a whole, is spending 21% on basic assistance. So some states are spending a bigger chunk on cash grants, and some states are spending almost none of that money on cash grants and have abysmally, even much more abysmally low amounts. So, you know, then, as Michelle said, but there's a variety of really important programs that come out of this same grant as well. So the challenge is, as often it is how to, like, we're not fighting against other important things that need to be happening, right? We have to figure out how to get the more money into the grants without taking away from anything else. But the trend overall nationally and in most states has been for that amount spent on cash assistance to go down and down and down and down.
Can I just
Some
add
states
something?
are spending
Of course.
Sorry.
Sure.
Just because I've been there, I think that we're so busy. It was my experience that I was so busy trying to survive that you lose your voice. You can't ask for help. You can't go to, right? You don't have time to write Bernie a letter and say, hey, can you make policy changes? So we just get muted. You know, I felt like I was losing my voice and just getting more smaller, and you know, it has wicked bad ripple effects and everything else. And I think that's part of those numbers is we are so busy surviving, we have no voice.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Sandra. I think I realize I've left a couple of like threads, Amanda, from questions you've asked, and one is just kind of add to what Sarah said, is because as you start earning, so the concept is it helps people overcome their barriers to employment. So as you start earning, I have done this calculation, but I don't have it at the tip of my tongue. Like, you don't have to be working very many hours at minimum wage to be off, right? And so if the benefit was larger, there'd be kind of more of a gradual transition, you know, and support as you are earning more. And people are able to keep this, it's called the income set aside. Like, there's the first 250, is that right, Jessica? I think first 250 of earnings, and then some percentage of earnings after that are excluded from your eligibility determination, but it's just not enough to create kind of a smooth transition. And I think the vision we would have for the program is that you start out having your basic needs met, you know, because for the reasons that Sandra said, like you aren't using all of your cognitive capacity to just survive. And then you're able to, either some people, look, this maybe is not something we want to talk a lot about, but some people just aren't able to work, and they need to be moving into to SSI or SSDI or whatever. And I get those confused. But like moving toward whatever the next step is, if it's overcoming barriers to employment, if it's moving to a more sustainable economic support, program. But we can't expect people to do that when they're, having to literally drive to food banks to supplement the SNAP program, which is the S in SNAP is supplemental. It's not supposed to be all your food, right? Like, so, Michael, you had your hand up, sorry.
Yeah, I had a question for you, Sandra. What sort of resources were available for your college-age son? Because I know a lot of times, right, you're still a dependent, but they get phased out once you turn 18. Just what sort of resources and how can we better navigate that system?
There wasn't a lot of resources. He would take extra money, extra loans out just so I could keep the power on. And there really was nothing. I missed a lot of meals because I wanted him to be able to do his work and, go to his classes with food in his belly. And, people didn't acknowledge it took gas money to get him to his classes. And there was really nothing. I was fighting a losing battle, but dang it, you still just fight. So I don't really have a good question besides there was nothing. It was harder than heck.
That's such a great question, Michael, and such a good point. Like you have these 18-year-olds that you are still caring for as a parent, but you're not getting benefits for them, and these young adults, right, we're just seeing so many young adults really struggling because of cost of living, like all of these things, and that's tough. Good question.
And that there was that sliver of that age group that kind of fell through the cracks around the stipend checks too, right? The checks that came. I mean, I have a daughter in that age range, and so it was feels all around. I did want to point out quickly that I forgot to mention when I started bagging on New Hampshire that New Hampshire's has the highest in the country TANF program, and they have indexed their benefit to 60% of the federal poverty level. So it automatically goes up every year. And I think I don't know, we haven't been able to really dig into what the rationale was for that, but my guess is that 60% plus some of those other benefits gets you fairly close to the poverty level. And so, which, as an aside, I think probably most folks on this call know that the poverty level is baloney, like it's insufficient. It's not indexed to the current realities of cost of living, but it is what we still use a fair amount.
I put this in the chat, but I just want to point out, because it's like one of my things, right? So a lot of the people who are on the program have their work requirements waived because they have really, really young children. They can't get a job that lines up when childcare is available. If they could get a job, the state would give them a grant. By the way, people used to, at least, there's pending legislation, but they used to have a copay, $25 a week, even on Reach Up, right? You could get a grant to pay for childcare that was way more than you get on Reach Up. So you could go work some garbage job scrubbing toilets, right? Instead of taking care of your own young child in your home. Why don't we value taking care of dependents, or take care of people when they're in a state of dependency because they have a temporary disability or that we give people so little, that we value that so little, when it's just a reality that's part of life, that you're going to be dependent when you're an infant, you're going to be dependent when you're sick, you might be a dependent when you're really old, right? So let's take care of those folks. Why do we underfund that so much?
And the worst part is, back to Michael's question, I was so worried that my 18-year-old was going to be negatively affected because I was struggling so hard. Then I was shaping a generation that was seeing me struggle with just basic things. And that was just horse manure. It should not be like that. I should be able to send, just because I had a traumatic brain injury and I was fighting so hard, doesn't mean that it should affect the next generation who's going to be taking care of us one day. Like, we got to call this crap out. Excuse my language, but it's true.
Yes, absolutely. And that's not language, Sandra. In my book. Are there other thoughts? Any questions about, what you would be communicating to legislators? I think kind of where things are at right now is that the budget is in House appropriations. The proposal that came over from House Human Services is to raise the base grant standard of need to 2019. Still having that rateable reduction, so it still will be basically half of the basic needs standard from a couple of years ago. Our ask would be, can we just get it to 21, even if you have to keep the rateable reduction? Like, why are we coming 2 years? And I think it's based on the numbers that that Representative Small shared, it's about a $500,000 difference between 19 and 21. But again, with things moving so much around, money, what the revenue picture is, it feels like there might be an opportunity to just do that.
And I just want to point out, because I did the math, even if they just level funded from last year, because there have been so many people pulled off the caseload because they're getting unemployment, which is way more than a reach up. Even if they level funded from last year, we could get to 2021 and we could reduce the rateable reduction.
Yeah. Such a good point.
Just level funding, right? Instead of what the governor proposed, which was massively dropping it.
Exactly. I mean, that's been our argument all along, is like you shouldn't have any kind of caseload reduction. You shouldn't recognize any caseload reduction savings until you have the benefit of meeting 100% of the need. Like, and that has been fallen on deaf ears for the most part. But that's the goal.
And the other part, right? Because even though people say, oh, well, the reach up people can just apply on their own and get some emergency rental assistance if they need it. When people are in that sort of scarcity mindset because they're busy just trying to survive, figuring out about some program and am I eligible is just too much of a hurdle to expect everyone to make. So let's, really do some affirmative work to have the department take action to make sure that everybody on reach up gets onto that program.
Yeah.
They have all the documentation. They have the proof that people meet the need.
Right. No, it's a really good point. And I think there is a connection, maybe not on particular on that issue, but certainly bringing the IT systems up to modernizing the IT systems would make all of this so much easier. I mean, we just recently found out that some states, I know we're running out of time here, but if you remember one of the slides that Sarah shared that showed, caseloads going up and then dropping once people were kind of getting off reach up because of the extended unemployment benefits. Well, in some states, they didn't count that as income. They let it pass through to folks on reach up. So they stayed on reach up or stayed on their TANF program and got that extra money, like actually had a chance to get ahead a little bit. Well, not get ahead, but, and Vermont didn't. And when we asked why, it was because it would have been really hard to program it or something. So we have to take that excuse off the table. So that whenever there's an opportunity to get more resources into families' pockets, they just do it. So that feels like we're probably at a good stopping point.
Yeah, Michael, I see that you're unmuted. And so if you have a comment, do you have one more comment or question?
Well, I was just curious about the indexing to the federal poverty line that you talked about in New Hampshire. Do you think, like, long term, it's more substantive? This is obviously a much bigger lift than the state of Vermont, but if you, instead of, like, what good is it to index it to a poverty line that's way below your basic needs? And like, how do you kind of get past that? And, is there a way to institute our own state level threshold you know, obviously you're going to get restrictions coming down because it's federal money. But yeah, just thinking about that was my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a much bigger conversation that needs to happen both federally and in the state about what's the best vehicle to address poverty, and TANF may not be it at all. In fact, and the fewer, you know, what we've seen of the reports that have just come out about the basic income experiment in Stockton, California. There was one in Alabama. Yeah, exactly. End welfare, as we note again, just give people cash. Like the antidote to poverty is money. And
also, I want to note with the American Rescue Plan, so there's this $300 a month advance credit of the child tax credit. You have to have made at least $2,500 in the year to be able to get it. It leaves out the people in deepest poverty, like the folks on Reach Up.
Yeah, that's just, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, so I think the message here is that we're really thankful that you're here, right, on Advocacy Day. And these are questions you can ask your legislators. These are things you can bring up at tables, you know, no matter who's at the table. You know, our state representatives are people. They want to hear our stories. They want to hear our questions. You know, they do want to hear our perspectives at every, you know, varying degree of that. So thank you all so much. I hope you'll be able to join the lunch session. You're going to end this meeting, go back into Whova, click the join live session. Even if you're going to go take a break, just get your session going. And thank you so much for being here. That was really interesting. Thank you, Michelle and Sarah and Jessica and Sandra. Like, thank you all. That was really great.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Be well.